Welcome to the bullshit-free zone. Welcome to Weight Loss Biohacks. In this video, we will tackle the most fundamental issue of all. When trying to lose weight, or even when trying to gain weight, is calories in versus calories out the only thing that matters? Now, we gotta settle this issue once and for all because almost everyone on earth will have a problem with their weight at some point in their lives. If you have absolutely no problem at all while you're 30 years old maintaining a slim, healthy, beautiful body, that may not be so when you're 40 or 50 or 60. Without understanding what truly determines body fat gain versus loss, you will never have confidence in any kind of diet that you follow. So, once and for all, let's go ahead and settle this. Now, what exactly are we going to talk about in this video? Number one, is it just the calories in versus calories out that matters? Are there any exceptions to calories in versus calories out? What are the counter arguments that people come up with? Let's in detail then address carbs versus fats. We will then speak about meal timing. We will put the scientific evidence on the table, and I will conclude with some interesting personal observations that I've accumulated during the last 30 years. Now, I'm going to come out and say it. Unfortunately, yes, it is almost nothing but calories in versus calories out. And I'm really sad this is so. I truly mean it. I'm not trying to be cute. I'm not trying to be dramatic here. This almost depresses me. Actually, not that this almost depresses me. This has for a long time depressed me until I got over it. Because for at least a decade, I did everything in my power to disprove this. I played around with macronutrient composition, with micronutrients, with all sorts of different supplements, with meal timing, by even varying, the exact proportion of saturated versus unsaturated fats in my diet, keeping very careful records in my own personal case, as well as, for my clients. Corresponded with a lot of people who were as fanatical about this as I have been. But no, unfortunately, the evidence, both, observations, anecdotal evidence, personal experiences of me and all the people around me, as well as, of course, most importantly, the scientific evidence leaves no room for doubt. It is the calories. But let me explain what exactly I'm trying to say here before, you throw something at me. There are so many factors, right? As we said, meal timing, micronutrient breakdown, micronutrients. How about sleep and stress? I mean, you may say, all right, if all the above doesn't matter, how about me being under a lot of stress and secreting a lot of cortisol? That must really make a difference, doesn't it? What I'm saying is the following. For as long as you're comparing reasonable, realistic diets that real people actually have a chance to do over, some period of time, there are many diets that you could do for maybe 2 to 3 days, but as long as we're talking about things that are actually doable, then yes, the only thing that matters is calories. All the other stuff matters so little that the sum total of everything else will make a very, very small difference. And of course, people who want to disagree with me, as soon as they hear it, will come up with the following childish argument. I've heard it a million times. Oh, okay, you're retarded. I'll tell you what. So you're basically telling me 1,300 calories from pure sugar, nothing but pure sugar, is the exact same thing as 1,300 balanced calories from healthy food. Is that what you're saying? No, that's not what I'm saying. Yes, 1,300 calories from pure sugar is going to have devastating consequences. But you know what? I absolutely don't care what 1,300 calories from pure sugar does to you because you will not be able to do such a diet. It's inconsequential. You will die if you try to eat 1,300 calories from pure sugar. After a while, you will die because you'll be missing some key amino acids, and far more quickly than you might assume, you will run into some very, very big problems. I'll actually tell you what. In fact, if you were to try and lose weight by consuming 1,300 calories on a daily basis, and you took 50% of those calories from sugar, even such a diet is not doable. And, this may come as a surprise. Like, isn't that exactly what people are doing? Like getting, almost off their calories from sugar? What people are doing, very happily, but getting fat as a result, you're telling us is not doable. What exactly are you talking about? Here's what I'm saying. If you are consuming a very small amount of calories, and 1,300 calories is a small amount of calories for most people or for just about anybody, and 50% of those calories come from sugar, then that leaves you only with the remaining 50% of calories, 650 calories, coming from, quote, real food. This is such a small amount of satisfying, filling food that will actually stay in your digestive tract that you will feel terribly hungry for most of the day and you will not be able to continue. You will either continue to eat a lot of sugar, but add on top a lot of other foods, and your caloric intake is going to go up to, let's say, 2,200 calories, or you will stop eating so much sugar and replace the sugar with some other foods that will keep you satisfied and only as a result be able to continue eating 1,300 calories. So not only is 1,300 calories from pure sugar not doable, but even much milder variations of this stupid thing are not doable. So, as long as we take a collection of same reasonable, doable diets and compare them, for example, if we compare the balanced diet, and balance for this purpose is, let's define it as what the U.S. Department of Agriculture recommends that you eat. Not that it's the best diet to follow, but let's just take that as a starting point. To compare that to a low-fat, reasonable low-fat diet that still provides the essential fats, and if you then compare those to a low-carb diet that doesn't lack vitamins and minerals, if you then, take the Okinawa diet that people in the Japanese island of Okinawa follow, with a lot of fish, a lot of vegetables, if you then, compare it to the Mediterranean diet, i.e., if you take a collection of reasonable, realistic, doable diets, amongst those reasonable, doable diets, the one with the lower calories is going to result in the greatest fat loss. That's what I'm saying. Now, there is one thing that might disrupt this whole equation. Now, some people are looking at this and probably screaming at the screen, calling me an idiot because I don't even know about the thermic effect of food, and protein is sufficient in order to invalidate the argument that I just made. The thermic effect of food refers to the following. When you eat a piece of food, the nutrients in there have to be processed. Fat has to go through a whole bunch of, chemical processes to be able to go into the cells and be used as either an energy source or to be stored. Same goes for carbs, same goes for protein. Protein is very difficult to process. In fact, it is so difficult that a good amount of the energy in protein has to be used up in order to process it, and you can burn a significant amount of the energy in protein to be able to just use it. As a result, protein is one potential disruptor of cycle, calories in versus calories out. Now, this effect is not so huge that it will immediately pop up in published research. In other words, if we compare a whole bunch of different dietary interventions, it is not immediately obvious that calories coming from protein, in quote, almost don't count. They're almost free calories. We do not necessarily observe this in all published research. However, strong arguments exist in favor of protein. So instead of turning this into an 8-hour long video, and trust me, it can really get that long, why don't we settle on this? Calories in versus calories out is pretty much the only thing that matters. However, let's make an exception for protein and simply say that you can increase calories up to a point by adding protein and still lose weight. So, for instance, if you've determined that you got to consume 1,400 calories in order to lose weight at a reasonable pace, you can go ahead and add, let's say, for argument's sake, 50 grams of protein, take your total caloric intake to 1,600 calories and still lose almost the same amount of weight because the calories coming in from protein, while they're not entirely free calories, do not exactly count in the same way as other calories do. But you know what? This particular observation does not tremendously change our diet recommendations anyway, because anyone who has worked with real people knows that increasing protein intake is the simplest and the most effective dietary intervention that you can do in order to help people lose weight. Yeah? So let's make a small exception for protein and then settle on cycle. Now, I've already given you an exception to cycle being, calories in versus calories out. Just because one can pinpoint, one can cherry pick a few exceptions to cycle here and there, do not let that, completely sway you in the wrong direction. Do not let the so-called experts scam you, swindle you by pointing to those few exceptions. Those are exceptional cases. They absolutely do not invalidate the fundamental principle that calories in versus calories out is the main thing that matters. Now, there are, of course, a lot of counter arguments, and let me briefly talk about that. And many counter arguments have come and gone, and every time it looked like we found the ultimate answer. At the beginning, scientists thought if you eat fat, you get fat. Then the pendulum swung in the complete opposite direction. For a while, we thought, and some people still cling on to this belief, it's the carbs that make you fat because very simple. Without carbs, there's no insulin. Without insulin, there's no fat storage. And you know what? I mean, both of these arrows are completely inaccurate. Without carbs, you can secrete a whole bunch of insulin because a lot of protein foods are very insulinergic. Insulinergic. I don't even know if I use that word right. With a lot of protein, you secrete a lot of insulin, and fat storage can absolutely happen without insulin. As biochemists like to say, fats can store themselves. In order to store fat from the food that you eat, you do not even need insulin. So neither the first nor the second assumption is accurate. And then we thought, we threw both of this away and we thought, oh, it's the timing of food. If you eat at the wrong time, you get fat, and that too isn't accurate. And then, of course, there was the French paradox. My God, that was the sexiest of all. The French eat a lot of fattening foods, whatever that means. Is it the high carb foods? Is it the high fat foods? We can't even settle on that. But, as a generalization, we used to say the French eat a lot of fattening foods. They eat a lot of forbidden foods and they don't get fat. Oh, it's got to be the wine that they drink. How anybody could have even entertained such a ridiculous thought is beyond me. And that too, of course, turned out to be completely inaccurate. The French eat smaller portions. They do not snack throughout the day. Not all three of their major meals are large. In fact, breakfast is what you something akin to what you see on the left-hand side: a coffee and half a croissant, maybe. And as a result, their total daily caloric intake is never very high. Now, here is the current argument that is most often put forth. People have stopped giving the old counter arguments, and most of the time these days I hear the following: the human body is incredibly complex, and when you basically reduce everything to psycho, then you're reducing the human body, you're simplifying the human body to something like a simple furnace. Psycho is way too simple to explain what's going on inside the human body. But you know what? It is precisely because of the fact that the human body is so very complex that psycho reigns supreme. Let me please repeat that. It is precisely because the human body is so very complex that it's psycho that matters. Let me explain. Let me first make an analogy. You're seeing a Tesla Model S, beautiful car, an electric car with a very sophisticated set of software running in the background in order to optimize energy consumption. Now, when you're driving the car in the car knows, if you put it on autopilot, the car knows when to accelerate, how hard to accelerate, when to brake, and how much regenerative braking to use, which routes to take, which side streets or which main highways to take in order to reduce, in fact, in order to minimize energy consumption. Can you go ahead and tell me some quick tips and tricks that I can employ if I got this car in order to reduce the energy consumption to below what the autopilot is capable of doing? I mean, can I maybe brake a little bit harder than the car would do on its own and save more energy? Can I maybe, I don't know, drive it backwards and drive from point A to point B more economically? No, you cannot, because the car is doing every possible thing that you could have possibly thought of and way beyond in order to minimize energy consumption. You cannot be cleverer than the car and improve it. Impossible. Now, the human body is way more complicated than a Tesla Model S. In fact, I absolutely urge everybody to click on the link on the screen and simply view, not study because that will take you more than a lifetime, but simply view the metabolic pathways in the human body. What you're seeing on the screen, and I've blown up, a little corner of it on the right-hand side, what you're seeing on the screen is all the processes that go on inside the human body in order to turn into energy the food that you eat, in order to store as fat the excess calories, in order to burn your own body fat, in order to liberate energy from it, i.e., the energy systems, referred to as the metabolic pathways, are as complicated as you see on the screen. In fact, they're much more complicated because this doesn't capture all the little intricacies. And there's, of course, some additional pathways which we're not even aware of. It is beyond mind boggling to look at this thing and to spend a minute um, just visualizing this entire thing. What is the purpose of this entire thing? What is the body trying to accomplish? It is trying to accomplish something very, very simple. It is trying to make sure that under any and all circumstances, the maximum amount of energy from the food that you consume is captured, that as little of it is used up for your bodily functions and for your energy demands, such as walking around or lifting heavy weights, and then as much of the remaining energy as possible is stored as body fat. In other words, this entire system is optimized in order to get you as fat as possible if you eat excess calories, and in order to make you lose as little body weight, as little body fat that is, as possible if there's an energy deficit. The body is already doing every single thing in its power in order to optimize the system as a whole. There is nothing that you can do to quickly trick this system into malfunctioning. The body realizes that humans sometimes consume energy in small portions throughout the day, versus at other times eat a lot in one sitting, that humans may consume calories from fats during certain parts of the calendar year, whereas during some other parts of the year, fruit, for example, is more abundant. And the body has put systems into place in order to capture as much energy as it is possible from all types of different foods that you might eat, from all types of consumption patterns that you might employ, and playing around with something as simple as meal timing is absolutely not going to disrupt this system. It is not going to malfunction because you're eating more of your calories at the beginning of the day versus the end of the day. Impossible. To even think such a thing could be true is preposterous. No way. Oh, how about fats versus carbs? I mean, are we also going to talk science, or are you just going to sit here and talk about your own personal fantasisms? No, we're going to talk science. There's so much scientific research covering this. It's not dozens, it's not hundreds of good studies that we have at hand. It is thousands. And, we could get into a discussion that will never end. So I'm just going to present a very small amount of scientific evidence. This is one of the best interventional studies ever. An interventional study means we're not just passively observing people or just asking questions to people regarding what they do, but instead we're making people do things. We're making half of them do push ups and half of them do pull ups, and then we're comparing the results. That's an interventional study. And this is one of the best interventional studies ever done on this subject. Stanford University, a very respectable institution, published in one of the best journals on the JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, 2018, fairly recent. Large sample size for this kind of a study, 609 overweight adults. Not only that, but they also looked at low carb versus low fat and tried to correlate it to metabolic risk factors. They're not just answering the question as to whether you lose more weight on low carbs versus low fat, but they're also looking in detail as to whether this makes a difference for those who have certain metabolic risk factors, such as high blood sugar, high triglycerides, high cholesterol, and so on and so forth. Now, this is as controlled an experiment as we can get unless we go ahead and confine people. Here is what they have done. They have divided people into low fat and low carb groups, and classes were taught by registered dietitians. How many sessions did they have? Once again, every 2 weeks for 2 months, they had held sessions and they really educated people. It says, as you'll see at the very bottom, the main goals were to achieve maximal differentiation in intake of fats and carbohydrates between the two diet groups. So Group one, they tried to make sure gets as many of their calories from fat and as little from carbs as possible. And for group two, they did the opposite. So they tried to really purify, for the lack of a better word, the two samples at hand and make one as much low fat as possible and make the other as much low carb as possible. Data were collected at baseline and at months 3, 6, and 12 for all cohorts. And this was also a long lasting study, which makes it significantly more reliable. Now, in order to get more controlled than this, you got to confine people into such a situation as a prison. And this has been discussed in the past. But even in a prison, you cannot exactly control what people eat. It's not exactly ethical to carry out this sort of research in incarcerated individuals. So this is just about as perfect a study as it gets. What are the conclusions? Very simple. Let's read. In this 12-month weight loss diet study, there was no significant difference in weight change between a healthy low-fat diet versus a healthy low-carb diet, and neither genotype pattern nor baseline insulin secretion was associated with the dietary effects of weight loss. So, as soon as you say it doesn't really make a difference in terms of weight loss, whether you follow a low carb versus low fat diet, people are going to come out and say, well, you're talking about healthy people and unhealthy people who already have their blood panel destroyed. It will make a difference. And this looked exactly at that. Are there any predisposing factors such as high blood glucose level, disrupted blood lipid panel that will identify whether you will benefit more from either of those two diets? And no, there was not. And here is a meta study, a very, very good meta study where they have looked at 23 trials from multiple countries. Once again, to remind you, a meta study is a study where you take a whole bunch of published research, you pool the data, and you analyze this pool of published studies. The studies in total had 2,780 participants covering a long time period, all the way from 1966 to 2011. And the conclusion is, as expected, reductions in body weight, waist circumference, and other metabolic risk factors were not significantly different between the two diets. The two diets being low carb versus low fat. But wait a minute, you're just focusing on the number you're seeing on the scale. Low carb is more heart friendly, isn't it? Maybe yes, maybe no, not that simple. Here, in this particular case, 32 studies were included in the meta-analysis. And look at what it says. The results of our meta-analysis do not allow for an unequivocal recommendation of either low-fat or low-fat diets in the primary prevention of cardiovascular disease. Let me make a little note here. If you blindly believe that simply cutting out the sugar is sufficient for heart health, and you very significantly increase your saturated fat intake, it may very badly backfire. Or you're stupid. We have had this discussion for decades, and it has been thoroughly debunked. You can eat all the butter, all the eggs in the world. It's not fat that destroys your lipid panels. It is the sugar. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. For some people, yes, eating as much fat, almost as much fat as they desire, and cutting out the carbohydrates will improve their lipid panel. For some other phenotype, for people with some other types of genetic makeup, the very high saturated fat intake will absolutely destroy their lipid panel. It is much more nuanced than is the carbs versus is the fat. How about intermittent fasting, which seems to be all the rage? Again, a systematic review and meta-analysis, a good one again. All of these studies are, as usual, linked in the description, so I'm not going to go into the entire background and read the exact study details. I'm not going to waste your time with this. Allow me to read just the conclusion. The pooled estimate for studies that investigated the effect of intermittent fasting energy restriction in comparison to continuous energy restriction revealed no significant difference in weight loss. I do intermittent fasting. I have been doing it for a very long time, way before, before it became fashionable. I like it because of some other reasons, which I will get into in later videos. But I'm convinced that eating the same number of calories spread out throughout the day would have the same effect on the scale as doing intermittent fasting. I'm saying this as somebody who's been eating this way for at least 15 years now. One final comment that interestingly keeps coming up. It's all good and well, but a huge dinner, especially calories that you consume right before going to bed, are really bad for you, aren't they? And look at the cute headline of this particular study. Are large dinners associated with excess weight, and does eating a smaller dinner achieve greater weight loss? Systematic review and meta-analysis once again. They looked throughout the entire literature and say the search yielded 121 full texts that were reviewed for eligibility by two independent reviewers. They have eliminated most of the studies because they lacked the consistency and thoroughness required. They say in all 10 observational studies and 8 clinical trials were included in the systematic review. So in total, 18 studies were included. Um, and they say, as a conclusion, recommendations to reduce evening intake for weight loss cannot be substantiated by clinical evidence, and more well-controlled intervention trials are needed. Great. Let's keep beating this dead horse and do study after study after study after study in order to investigate something that by now should have been long settled. But you know what? The evidence we have at hand cannot lead to recommending either a bigger or a smaller dinner. But despite all you're saying, low carb has worked for me. What do you say about that? Sure, absolutely, it could have worked. But if low carb has worked for you, or if low fat has worked for you, or if intermittent fasting worked for you, it worked because it lowered your caloric intake. Yes, some people absolutely do find that they take, find it easier to stick to a diet if they reduce carbohydrates. If I have a client like that, I absolutely do not argue with them. I tell them where I stand as far as this issue is concerned, and I say, let's not change what's working for you. Let's improve what you've already settled on. If you're liking low carb better, let's make sure that your nutrient intake isn't very off, that you're not lacking certain nutrients, that extreme intakes of saturated fat are not adversely impacting your lipid panel. But absolutely, let's continue with what you have identified as working for you. But do keep in mind that what you're doing is working for you in terms of weight loss because it is resulting in lower caloric intake. Allow me to conclude this entire observation with three quick observations. One, while living in New York, I have attended every single seminar of this kind that I could find. Um, a lot of researchers were giving little seminars, sometimes aimed at the general public, sometimes intended for other scientists like themselves. Some of them were open to general admission. Some of them, I requested and got into, even though I wasn't qualified to be sitting there. I've spoken to a lot of scientists one on one, biologists, dietitians. I have a lot of friends who are personal trainers. Not one person who I would label a true scientist that I've met in person has so far come out to me and said, Luca, it's not the calories. It's not the calories that matter. I'm convinced of that. Not one person that I have met came out and said that. Even though there are such people on the internet, scientists who claim that it's not calories in versus calorie out that matters. They are in such a small minority. Uh, for all intents and purposes, they can be looked at as a rounding error. Just a quick personal observation. Many clients either track their calories over a longer term, basis, or we've tried to guesstimate their calories. Whenever I work with a client, and I work with 300 people so far, not every single one of them track their calories. A small number did, relatively small number did, but that's still like, I don't know, maybe 60, 70 individuals who were meticulous about this. Not a single client tracked their calories and said, you know what, I'm convinced that it's not calories that matter. While doing diet A versus diet B, one diet had significantly higher number of calories, yet led to greater fat loss. Not one single client said that. Whenever I track someone's calories, and I did that through a variety of means over the years, since the advent of applications such as WhatsApp, in a few instances when a client really insists on us measuring as much as we can measure, they send me every single thing that they eat through WhatsApp. We try to very roughly guesstimate, how many calories they're taking in, keeping in mind that this is a fairly inaccurate method, but it will give us a directional idea, as in it'll give us an idea as to whether they're consuming greater number of calories than before or lower number of calories than before, even though we may not know the exact figure. Whenever we did this, both me and the client were absolutely convinced it is calories that mattered. Never, never did we face a situation where we thought otherwise. Alrighty, so let's conclude. All right, you might say, I'm convinced that it's calories in versus calories out that matters. But eating less, eating fewer calories is really, really difficult. It's torture. I know it can be, yeah. And I'm here to make it, much less of a torture. But why go through this torture? Why simply not burn more calories in order to lose weight? After all, if you burn more calories than you take in, you'll lose weight, won't you? Yes, you will. Well, I thought you'd never ask. So, see you in the next video. Thank you.